Greetings, everyone. Greetings, folks out there in YouTube world and Facebook land. I am Brother Youssef, and this is the Joko, and we're happy that you could join us for a Joko conversation this evening. I'm going to bring on my partner, Tasha. Greetings, Tasha. You're muted. Oh, try again. Oh, there we are.
We on? All right.
Yeah, we're on.
Greetings, Yusuf, and greetings, ancestors who are sitting with us in the invisible world.
Indeed. Speaking of ancestors, we always begin by honoring the ancestors of the folks on whose land we sit, recognizing that we, the Joko Collective, do our work in what is now called the Los Angeles Basin, the unceded lands of the First Nations Tongva people. In the settler colony of Los Angeles, the settler colony of California, the settler colonial state of the United States, global empire. So we honor those ancestors as well as our own direct lineage ancestors.
Indeed, and speak that truth without apology, no matter who is in the process of attempting to rewrite that or cancel that, shall we say, from the popular narrative, the narrative that's become popular because of the efforts of avid researchers and scholars and academics in the tradition of the ethnic studies movement, which they assiduously attempted to stamp out, which has succeeded in and is in the process of succeeding, forming popular consciousness about the true histories of this space, of this land, and is creating a undesirable wave of popular sentiment for multiracial democracy and actual pluralistic democracy based, throughout communities. So the campaign, the crusade, shall we say, maybe better said, to stamp out wokeism and to make a thing of wokeism, to make a thing
of wokeism, right? Yeah, the language is interesting, isn't it? I find it ironic, like that there's resistance to the language of settler colonialism, though in approved narratives, right, of the U.S. pageant of history, right, idea. The language of settlement is used in talking and particularly talking about the colonial period and the colonists. That language is used in the approved U.S. history books, the ones approved by those who want to ban books. But it's funny how that language changes, right? When the settlers, the British, the Dutch, the German settlers, the French settlers become the United States, then as they push west, they're no longer settlers. Suddenly they become pioneers. right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So the work is the same, right?
Mm.
The work. So it's very interesting to me, right? That the limits put on language, right? You can use the language here in this context, and settler and colonist are separated, right?
Mhm.
People are getting fired or have been fired, right, for
Mhm.
using the terms together, settler colonialism, um,
Mhm.
as if it isn't
Mhm.
an historical fact. So,
Mhm. Mhm. And being clear, there's all kinds of ways as the discussion around this election sharpens and becomes more focused, certain things to, I think, be conscious of stating and bringing up as possible, when and where is possible. And I've heard it referred to in the way that I think of it as well, to refer to this this change of shift in state power, um, as the shifting to a new regime rather
mhm,
than, right,
a new
this
administration,
promotion of, and regime, yeah,
mhm,
just the language of
rather
regime is
than using the
I think.
language administration, using regime.
Oh, okay, yes, and or rather than using the language of Trump, the Trump presidency, the Trump,
Mhm,
and this in civically inaccurate description of, how these branches interact and and interplay, um, and some of these things that promote or go with, right, complement the lack of certain fundamental lack of understandings that folks are talking about all over the place that are surfacing. For instance, right, this whole notion of, well, the economy was better under Trump before, you know, the
mhm,
Biden economy was not good, so this kind of mistaking larger trends for something that are, have causes or roots,
mhm,
president
mhm,
presidency, that there's some kind of transformation, um, every 4 to 8 years in trends that are established, um, in terms of decades, if not centuries, you know.
mhm.
Mm. And that is something that I think we hear a lot of just in this, the post-election reaction. More and more folk are talking about the problem of the uninformed voter, the problem of the uninformed electorate,
Mm,
and the effects of this undereducation, systematic undereducation that we always talk about. And
yeah.
and here, here it shows up
So
in
these are the results of, and it's not the first time, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
that is shown itself, right? The
Mhm.
that lack of misunderstanding, being misinformed and disinformed people, and then also people because of the really the attack on education, right? And the I think a cultivated um, anti-intellectualism
Mhm.
that really goes, that's much older than the present moment. So they're
Mhm.
not everyone's curious, right? Or they're not everyone's
Mhm.
curious. Um, so we end
And
up,
we're lo
we end up with these things. I mean, people, yeah, I was reminded, or I thought I found it instructive. Maybe I should say
Mhm.
that, and I think the errors are different, and so different factors come into play. But this that the system allowed a Trump to be elected twice, and each time he has run, right? It's
Mhm.
the race he lost. It was a close race, relatively
Mhm.
speaking, or at least a bunch of
Mhm.
people voted for him anyway. I mean, whatever the margin was, he had
Mhm.
a large number of people voted for him. The
Mhm.
but the commentator might have been Leisha Miller, and I want to give credit to the source where it's due. I do believe she noted that the United States, right, a voting public, they elected Nixon twice, right? They elected
Mhm.
Reagan twice, they elected George W. Bush twice, and they might have elected George H. Bush twice if it weren't for Ross Perot, which actually she didn't mention, but I just that was close, right? That was a
Mhm.
presidency one, I think, with the plurality and not a majority. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so there's that element of it is what certain Americans want, right? The majority
Mhm.
population, and
Mhm.
um, and that's in keeping, with it's like constant backlash. It's like all um, conservative politics, reactionary politics have been just that, right? Reacting to all the gains of the mid 20th century. I mean, I swear.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and just you just go down the list, right? That hidden story, at least now, that used to be much better understood because it was talked about, more openly.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
roots of anti-blackness and
Mhm.
opposition to the civil rights movement that was very much a part of the evangelical movement in the 50s, the 60s, animating um, you know uh, 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 animating this movement into the 70s, right, with gains of the civil rights movement, and also though the skill for them to change their tactics, right, as they're challenged in the courts over race exclusive schools, right? That they and so began letting in some black folks. The that reaction to the advancement of non-white people in the society, and particularly jumping off with resistance to the civil rights movement. Then you add to that, right, the women's liberation movement, as it was called in my childhood, right, and youth. It was the women's liberation movement before, or at least that was the language I grew up with before hearing and understanding the idea of feminism, right? But that was the language of that time, right, the late 60s into the
Mhm.
70s,
Mhm.
right,
The 70s,
liberation.
right.
And
Mhm.
so the gay liberation movement, which was the language of the time, right? And
Mhm.
um, but this is what they're reacting against, right? As
Mhm.
without the understanding of these economic forces, no notion, or at least no public discussion of political economy, right? Just this
Mhm.
notion of the
Mhm.
economy, which really I
Mhm.
think most people don't have a full grasp
No,
on, of
no.
something magical, right? Like you were saying, right? Something that every 4 years somehow, 4 to 8 years, right? A president um, it can change those forces, or make
Mhm.
an individual difference. And it's really
Mhm.
just their figurehead, or a repository for everybody's feelings about the economy at any
Yes,
given moment.
which reduces to feelings about how affluent I feel,
Yeah.
how much ease feel in meeting my expenses, being able to have disposable monies to participate in culture, having, you know what I'm saying, just the
Mhm.
level of ease, the level of ease with consumption, with the ability
Mhm.
to kind of consume by choice. is what, which is certainly an aspect of economy, but
Mhm,
understanding
mhm.
the place in which we need to understand what shapes those outcomes, what shapes affluence for working class people, for people who are going to a
Mhm.
job getting wages,
Yeah.
um, is where, is where that stops. And um, this other piece with the talking about the relative or the systematic miseducation of the population, anti-intellectual culture,
Mhm.
um, also de facto suppression of discourse and debate, and what I'm saying, that just that whole, it's the very powerful effect of it being a cultural attitude. Oh, we don't want to talk about anything of
Mhm.
weight, anything weighty. Um,
Anything we yeah.
if Harris had been elected, it would have been the same would still be true of
Mhm.
the electorate.
Mhm.
A lot of folk go back to the miscalculation of the where the Black voting community was credited with putting Biden and Harris in their winning position over uh, Sanders and Warren. You know, that there is a a great example, of many things, and in terms of us understanding what set of politics would tend to be most beneficial for us as a Black community. So you're right, a lot of folks, and I think you said it yesterday. We were talking about it yesterday. If it had been a Sanders Warren presidency, there's a lot of discussions we wouldn't even be having now. You know, and this wave of grievance politic that's so rooted in impoverishment and the struggle for, again, being for affluence and not wealth, but just the ability to move, through your day to day without enormous pressures, financial pressures, um, would have been limped in the bud, would have been largely nipped in the bud, which doesn't mean white supremacy neutralized or eradicated. It doesn't mean anything but
It doesn't mean a
that,
lot of things, right? But
huh?
some alleviate. It doesn't mean a lot of things, right? About
Right.
the U.S. empire, but it does
Right.
mean other things, right? It does mean some alleviation of
Pressure,
misery for people.
which translates to, yes, which translates to dampening that fire, that agitation, that
Mhm.
urgency, that
Yeah,
that thing that gets manipulated
and it
and
can mean
channeled.
something on the international scene also. I mean, whatever a Sanders Warren international policy, might have been, but uh, I mean, at least Bernie is what right now saying, look, you need to stop sending weapons to Israel. I mean, that's even that is a damn improvement, right?
Yeah,
Anyway, so
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
what the measure is so you know so poorly as it is, but nonetheless, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not
Mm-hmm.
a continuing, unquestioning support by the
Mm-hmm.
current administration, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not a promise of annexing the West Bank and proposing an ambassador to the Zionist state that won't say the words West Bank. but instead,
Yeah.
uses the term Judea and Samaria, right? A biblical
Wow.
term, because
Uh-huh.
people who are committed
Right.
to biblical literature, and I want to emphasize
Yes.
literature, as if it is a history book,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a
Yes. Yes.
misunderstanding, and which don't even have to do anything with your spiritual life. I mean, just in how one may interact with that set of writings, right? But it's not a history book, and that is very much people need it to be, right? For their
Mm-hmm.
claims and whatnot.
And for lack of comparison, largely, right?
Hmm.
Because if there's again goes back to um, intellectual culture, the quality investment in education, in public education, So a question that comes to mind is, for how many of us is the Bible, however closely, uh, for many of us, how much our biblical narratives, um, however closely we read or understand the Bible, or can, you know what I'm saying? For how many of us is that a narrative of like a continuum of, you know, through a sense of antiquity? For how many folks does that define the idea, the imagery, the sense of antiquity and a continuum to the present? For how many of that is that the founding myth, certain
Hmm.
tenets of it, certain tenets of it. And
Hmm.
so which this task of creating a state narrative, right? As we know some of the, and I wish I could call them my name. I'll see if I can find it on the internet as we're talking about. But the folks that were doing the textbook writing in at least Texas, where people were up in arms about the representations uh, of the Africans, the enslaved Africans, of the
Hmm.
labor movement, of all of these histories of indigenous people, all of these histories, and these are the
Yeah.
folks that are to be commissioned to create and institute Trump's, what is it? What does he call it? In response to the 1619 um
Oh, the 1776 something, or I mean, there are
something,
a couple of things, right? But
whatever it is,
yeah,
with
there's something
the
about the
patriotic
77.
history.
Yeah.
Yes, reference 776. So um it you know it is and will be effective, and there is still a lot of space for activists to get
Hmm.
in and move around, to be um, to raise these competitive questions, competitive narratives, and critical thinking, and the notion and the offering of critical thinking, which feels different than being evangelized or indoctrinated, or, you know what I'm saying? That sort of stuff. The attempt to convert, you know what I'm saying? To
Hmm.
stimulate and respect and to ask someone to critically consider is a different respect of the
Yeah.
humanity, you know. Um, and so it's, that I think that space is becoming,
Hmm.
definitely becoming intense, and you see that language kind of all over the place. The need for civic education, the need for education, the need for political education, the need for
Hmm.
education. Recognizing that as a really important factor
Hmm.
in all of this. In all of this. So so here it is.
So that, the United States is a religious country, right? There are a lot of religious people in it. There's historically, right there, it's kind of baked into the culture of the dominant society in a particular way, right? Its own, the American playing out of the Judeo-Christian myth, right, and the idea um, of this land being a new promised land, and even if that idea develops, right, once settlement happens. But these is all, so there's been that kind of language about, you know, the land mass, right? This new promised
Mhm,
land, for particular types of, or at least self described and self-identified, religious refugees, right, from the religious wars in Europe in the early modern period. But then you have these events also in these movements in the U.S., right? The Great Awakening, right? The Great Awakening in
mhm,
the colonial period, or what they call the colonial
mhm,
period, right? The pre-United States, maybe,
mhm,
pre, I think, pre-war for independence, maybe even, there's already,
mhm,
Massachusetts, right, is created as a theocracy, right, a religious state for these Calvinists, and Rhode Island is a breakoff um, colony um, with similar religious ideas. One difference being, that I can't remember her name now, Anne, but I can't remember the last name. Anyway, they wouldn't let women preach, right? And she
mhm,
wanted to preach, and that this and the other guy is Williams. I can't. I remember her first name, his last name. History of Rhode Island. But anyway, so it becomes a break off, for religious reasons, right? And the some of these others, the Lutherans and other and maybe other Calvinists too, coming from the German, the
mhm,
Mennonites and whatnot, right? The German
mhm,
settlers. I mean, this religious character, right? To
mhm,
a lot of
mhm.
these early colonies, Maryland, Maryland, right? Specifically, founded by Lord, who was it? Baltimore, right? Lord Baltimore as a Catholic
Okay,
colony. Um,
okay. Mhm, mhm,
right, and so there's that history. It's already embedded in the history. This
mhm,
notion of the United States as a type of promised land, and a people set
mhm,
apart. This language is used by American preachers, American political thinkers in some kind of way, and then yeah, again, like these sort of these periods of revivalism, right,
mhm,
and
mhm.
the and the itinerant
Notion
preacher.
of survival. Yes, right, the notion, all of these very American, very much Americanisms, but yes, go ahead.
Well, so really, just that is deeply a part of the what has been the United States experience, right, um, and it goes right. The certainly look at the development of Mormonism and what's his name, Mr. Smith, um,
Mhm, Joseph Smith. Mhm,
Joseph. Thank you. I wanted to say John, and I know it's wrong, right? Joseph Smith, right?
mhm,
And then the congregations and communities that developed from, because not everybody that was part of that movement becomes Salt Lake City Mormons, right? Or that branch of Mormonism. Um, but again, just making the point of how deeply it's embedded in the idea of the United States and the practice of the United States. However, and also as maybe that early source of any type of education, right? And the
mhm,
Bible as a primary source for
mhm,
reason. other than the
Right.
literate minority, right? 'Cause, that literate
Mhm.
minority. But
Mhm.
the change in society, late 18th century into the 19th century, with the developing notion of the public school and
Mhm.
a generalized literacy, the idea of a generalized literacy, right? At least a
Mhm.
sort of fundamental literacy, um,
Democratization of literacy. Mhm.
right? The
Mhm.
but but with consequences, right? Very real consequences that the ruling class recognized, and I believe coming from the Heritage Foundation in the 1970s, um, maybe working with or advising the Ford administration, perhaps. But anyway, this notion, right, or maybe even the Nixon administration, but this notion
Mhm.
of the problem of, and I do believe it's the Heritage Foundation. I'm not positive that, right, that the individual was connected with the Heritage Foundation or one of these other right wing foundations, but I do think it's Heritage. The
Mhm.
problem of, right, and this person uses the language. I apologize for not knowing his name off the top of my head. And as you and I talked about, we didn't have a lot of time for extra research this week, but he makes the point of the problem they've created through public education of an educated proletariat, and that they don't want that because of what they're facing at the time in the 60s and the 70s, as people are
Mhm.
organizing and demanding more. And so there are sectors of this pushback, right? There's the evangelical sector of it, that religious sector of it, that aspect of the U.S. society, where religiosity is part of the what people might want to call the U.S. character, right? And
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
these elite foundations that are trying to control these movements, right, and plan for how to deploy, um, well, how to dismantle, uh, the state, right? Dismantle the structures that can alleviate some of that misery,
Mhm.
foster a critically thinking, literate, curious,
Mhm. Mhm.
engaged public,
Mhm.
um, and manage this economy of emotions, right? I might say,
Mhm.
that I think is,
Mhm.
because and so much of it has been reactionary, right, since the 1960s, in
Mhm.
every part of the United States, including its liberal parts. It's for whatever that's worth, and that might be worth something, right? So
Mhm.
anyway,
Gives
mm-hmm,
gives me a few things. One, I like that language, economy of emotions, managing the economy of emotions. Um, so much the work of the educational process of propaganda, of media
mm-hmm,
propaganda, in that century of self, century of the self,
mm-hmm,
um, way of in that century
mm-hmm,
of the self lens, and then talking about the perceptions, the perception, the notion of a cabal, the hidden cabal, which is also, as I've learned, through some specific reading and questioning, comes along,
mm-hmm,
is seated, appears in during the time of the Great Awakening, certain tropes
mm-hmm,
of uh, the state under the state, the hidden state.
yeah,
Usually it's Jews, which comes over from a part of the European heritage. Know the
mm-hmm.
notion of
Inventors of
you know
anti-Semitism.
all Jews, yes, behind the state mechanisms and
Mhm,
controlling for all of these outcomes, right? Always kind of explaining the whatever the perceived issues are of the day, right? Because there's always
Mhm.
issues of a moral panic of some kind or another.
Mhm.
There's always issues of commiseration and class tension and misdirected and misunderstood sources of pressure, and all of those things are always present in one form or another. But also this kind of question of uh, the the spurious narratives that are generated and circulated about a deep state, not
Mhm.
not at all this regime's language. They don't own or did not coin that notion or language,
Right, yeah, really
at
interesting
all.
how they're deploying that,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, the notion of the deep state, the notion of which is really just kind of like directly, if you know who you're listening to and what they're promoting, and listen to some of this QAnon rhetoric and all of this sort of thing, it's not deep. It's like, yeah, it's the same
Mhm.
kind of stuff. Um, uh, blood rights, or I'm saying blood rights, but there's a language for it that refers to the murder of children or the abuse of children, and you'll think of it in a minute. But there's a language for it, referring to
The QAnon
particular
thing?
protocols, and particular in the protocols of the elders of Zion. The
Uh-huh.
notion of sacrifice of young Christian children. The
Oh,
QAnon,
yeah, okay, yeah, what is that, like, the blood libel thing? Is
like,
that what
well,
it is?
is blood libel? I think it
Well,
might be
yeah,
blood
I'm not
libel. It has a specific name. It has a specific name, but
it's
that
not
that
the blood
trope,
libel. Yeah.
that
Yeah, I know what
trope,
you
which
mean, though, yeah.
has resurfaces again and again, but has resurfaced strongly in this current rhetoric, and the notion that the Democrats are now the circle of of those in league with Satan, and sacrificing children literally. There's, what I'm saying, folks that are
Mhm.
having that kind of belief piece, and that have a kind of equation of Trump with some kind of messianic figure or savior figure, and all of those things are
Mhm.
being quote. And in terms of how power is really manipulated, um, with an understanding of the players and certain of these analyses that have been outlawed and
Mhm.
outlawed and made taboo. We talk about the critique of capital, the critique of corporate conspiracy, the critique, class analysis, those kinds of things. Yeah. So all of this is going toward, the the question of, who are the real players of power manipulating, uh, not too far behind the scenes and very much out in the open, and
Mhm.
raises
Mhm.
this question, Yusuf, also of what have you come to understand about this dark enlightenment movement and society and ideology, and how that is playing a role in this reclamation of, this super ethno state hierarchy type, you know,
Mhm.
vibe. All of that
Mhm.
to ask that question.
Well, I know it's been empowered, right? I mean, whatever, that one of the folks who's supposed to, or yours reportedly, um, of this way of thinking is the South African billionaire, immigrant to the United States, Peter Thiel, right? Is and not this movement, right? Which is, I think, I guess, could really be described as top down, right? It is an elitist movement. It's not a grassroots thing. Um, but there are the compatible grassroots groups, right? The foot soldiers, basically, right? The Aryan nations and the various neo-Nazi and Klan organizations. But it is very much a
Mm.
top-down thing, and several of the individuals associated with it, ironically, I guess, in a way, coming out of San Francisco and out of
Mm.
the tech, out of tech, right? Out of what they're calling Silicon Valley, but Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Peninsula. The This term is also will go by paleoconservatism, right? Paleoconservatism. Um,
Mm.
and Peter Thiel is on record. Where I think I mentioned it last week, that freedom is incompatible with democracy.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that I think that meaning, right, that feeling, is
Mm.
very widespread and and speaks to some of the
Mhm.
reaction to the civil rights. It feels like the sort of thing that fits well with the ideas around the posse comitati or comitatus,
Mhm.
how to say it. Yeah,
Pontius
that
Mhm.
and the sovereign citizenship, thing, right?
Mhm.
That freedom, right? Because this country was built on freedom,
Mhm.
right? That's the
Mhm.
supposedly the central value. The So it's been empowered, right? I mean, Peter Thiel, right, is intimately connected to the vice president elect, politically, um, who
Mm.
also comes out of that world, right? Went to work in the Silicon Valley world, how he became, um, a protege of Peter Thiel. And I think it might have started with an internship or something like that, right? Or seeing Peter Thiel, speaking. Maybe I forget where he went to school. Was it Ohio State? Um, or maybe where he went to grad school. I can't remember that exactly. Yeah, Yale, right? I think he might have been at
Yeah.
Yale.
Mhm.
So they're empowered, right? So the ideas associated with that, which is very much in keeping with the things we've been hearing from the vice president elect in terms of the place of women, right, in the society, for example, and in the family. Again, this is part of paleoconservatism, right? And
Mm. Mhm.
I mean, what does people think that means? Right? I mean, paleo is old, right? That this is old,
Yeah.
right? Old
Thank
conservatism,
you.
right? Paleo, right? Going all the way back, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so through Peter Thiel, if no one else, but also I believe folks are saying, well, I think that can also be attributed to Elon Musk. And I certainly heard echoes of that when he gets up there talking about I'm dark MAGA, right?
Right.
What is okay? Where does this come from, right? Why are you dark MAGA? Is this a nod to the dark enlightenment thing,
Mother
right?
was already dark.
I mean, what is this,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
this thing, right? That's got to be a whistle for those who know, right? What else is dark, right? I mean, how else is that used in the popular culture, for example?
Mm.
Thing,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, it's
Mhm.
something, but something after dark. But anyway, the
Mhm.
so Elon Musk is not the other, another South African billionaire
Mm.
immigrant. And I, when I hear, for example, Dr. Horn think it's important, say that it's important to identify these individuals. And he also talks about one other person, a Sachs, but I'm not sure which Sachs. Is it Jeffrey Sachs, maybe? That these billionaire individuals from South Africa who gained their wealth during the era, right? This is not post-apartheid, and someone like Elon, who I, inherited, right? And this may be the case with all of
Inherited,
us,
right,
right? This is inherited
right.
money, right? And
Has
I
not
and
been
I just recall,
not
our friend from South Africa, and his
mhm,
conversation with me, saying that many of the wealthy white South Africans during the struggle of the 70s
mhm,
and 80s, and particularly in the 80s, could see the writing on the wall, were very
mhm,
unhappy about it, and made it a point to move to California, and
mhm,
specifically
mhm,
to southern Orange County,
mhm,
northern San Diego County, right? Some of the most
mhm,
conservative places in this country and in the world. And if it's in this country, in the world.
mhm,
And I think people don't realize how conservative parts of the Bay Area are, right?
mhm.
Just like Southern California, you get out of the city proper, right? You get out of the city, and
Right,
it's not, any sort of, I mean, I don't want to say it's a progressive paradise in these cities, right? Santa Monica is no longer
right,
the People's Republic of Santa Monica, and it's still better than a lot of places. Berkeley is
right.
no longer the People's Republic of Berkeley,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
And again, this is where a lot, it is the Bay Area, this, bastion of progressivism, where a lot of this um,
mhm.
ideation and
Reactionary.
discourse,
Mhm.
is emerging from this elitist, intellectual
Oh,
wing that
yes,
is
yes.
empowered, through this election. Um, there's
Mhm,
a sort of the philosopher of this movement, also coming out of the tech world in the Bay Area of California, Northern California, although the far Northern Californians think of it as Central California. Curtis
mhm,
Yarvin, who has a pen name online, I think Moldbug something. Um,
mhm.
yeah, Mencius Moldbug, I think is his pen name, his blog
Okay.
name. But Curtis Yarvin, who
Mhm,
also comes out of this tech world, made his money in the tech world. Maybe I don't, I'm not as familiar with his background, but is very much a philosopher of this movement. They are in favor of dismantling these democratic structures. Are
mhm,
have I have we're theorized, the possibility of a new kind of feudalism or a return to the
mhm,
city state as a governing model, maybe along the lines of a Singapore, right, as a city state. I think the modern city state, Singapore being the model. What seemingly no concern for what inequalities, right, exist in Singapore, or Singapore's relationship to the global capitalism that impoverishes most of the world. The role of ethnic multi the multi-ethnic character of Singapore, and what kinds of contradictions are happening there. Um, but this return to the city state as the model for governance and polity and
hmm,
statehood,
hmm,
and they are corporate entities, though. I mean, these city
mhm,
states are essentially corporations, right? And run on the corporate
hmm,
model, right? Which is not democratic, right? The
mhm.
corporate model is not
Right.
democratic. It is
Hi.
fundamentally
That's
authoritarian, right?
yeah, it's
And
right.
capitalism forever, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
capitalism forever.
Mhm,
What did Elon Musk say about one of the recent attempted coups in Bolivia, or maybe a couple of years ago? We'll coup who we want. That's the attitude of many of the people in this so-called dark enlightenment, the paleoconservative movement, which I think people need to take seriously.
mhm,
They are, they may be, for example, perhaps they are anti-NATO, perhaps they are anti-Atlanticist, but they ain't pro
Mhm.
you. Right? They're still, what
Right.
do they call it? Western civilization chauvinist.
Mhm.
And there's been that tendency, right, in Europe, in the European right, I think since the invention and deployment of NATO, that not every part of the right was
Mhm.
on board. I mean, there are nationalist tendencies, still in European countries,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
They're right wing, they're capitalists, and they don't like being under the boot of the United States, right? They recognize, right, it is a global U.S. economic and military empire, right, and they would like
Right.
to break with that. But again,
Mhm.
that don't mean they're trying to, put African resources in African hands, or
Hands.
Indonesian
It's
resources really in
not
the,
for the Af
et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah.
South Korea is still supposed to be a colony, right? Maybe even more so, right, on the corporate model, right? Um,
Mhm.
Maybe Samsung can openly rule, South Korea and maybe North Korea too under their model. So these are some of the people behind who feel empowered and one of the reasons
Mhm.
they're feeling empowered is because of this language of a mandate, which we know, as more of the votes from now 2+ weeks ago are counted, is less and
Mhm.
less of a mandate.
Mhm. Even in the
They're going to act like
context
it is anyway. Go ahead.
Mhm. I was just gonna throw in, even in the context, and I don't know if we said this earlier, if this was when we were talking before we came on, in the context of an underactive electorate,
That's
severely
right.
underactive electorate. Is it that 30 is the
Yeah,
number 30%? The last number I understood
something
was
like
30
that. Something like
of
that. That
eligible
most
voters
voters who could vote
stayed
didn't
home.
vote.
Didn't vote. And this so but there I think that there is which always surfaces in this conversation, that is about democratic space. So it's actually to
Mhm.
the advantage or expanding and activating the democratic space,
Yeah,
but it is to the advantage that a minority of people actually do the voting. And uh, over that, the perception, I think they are very clear that the of all of these dynamics, and very clear that the perception of mandate is a causal factor, that
mhm, mhm.
people, act and react to the sense that, oh, well, everybody's doing it. So that in itself, not only this effect, but the effect that that has for people latching on further, or
Yeah,
latching on to,
that's right,
let me check
which
this
there have
out.
been reports of, yeah.
Mhm.
You know,
That
in
just
in in that atmosphere, right? In the atmosphere of this notion of somehow this was an overwhelming victory, so some people are
yeah,
like, well, maybe I need to be down with that. But it wasn't.
exactly.
It wasn't
Yeah,
an overwhelming victory, right? And
victory
that has to be said, right?
amplified,
The folks
right?
who are going to very soon be in the opposition need to be saying that. Right? They
Right.
need to be saying that. They need to be pointing out
Yes.
that some of the most right wing folks running for Congress did not win, right, and have been replaced by
The down
liberals.
ballot conversation, the
The
blue
down
down
ballot
the
conversation
progressive
that matters.
down
It
ballot. Yeah.
matters that at least at last reporting, right? The last time I saw the reporting, which I think was 2 days ago, and there were still votes coming in, and there was no expectation that the votes coming in, because they were coming in from uh, populous um, blue states,
Mhm.
that there weren't going to be that many more for Trump, that it wouldn't
Mhm.
change the outcome of the election, and
Mhm.
aren't expected to change the outcome of the popular vote, but that
Mhm.
Trump is receiving less than 50% of the votes of people, fewer than 50% of the people who can vote voted, and
Mhm.
the winner of
Mhm.
the election received fewer than
Mhm.
50% of those votes. It
Yes.
was a
Mhm.
much closer outcome in the popular vote. I mean, I don't even, it
Yes.
doesn't make any difference. What does it matter to bring up the electoral college? Because
Full
it's
college,
already
right,
there.
I was
It's
gonna
an
say,
anti-democratic,
whatever that
stop
number
anyway,
looks
right?
like.
So it doesn't matter. But the part of that depression people were feeling, right, is this our country? Well, yes, it is. It
Yes,
is
it
your
always has
country.
been.
Yes, it
Yeah,
is your country. But within that, not everybody was going along with this mess, right? This mess
right,
was
right,
clearly,
right,
you know, not what even if they
right,
don't think about the other things their
right.
country do, they're like, look, this cannot be.
Yeah,
And so,
yeah.
and maybe the big difference was all those people who stayed home, because that is when Republicans tend to win the elections, is when turnout is low.
And also, all of these factors, all the cumulative effect of voter suppression and the
Yes.
various methods of suppressing, as it is said, as it is articulated, the demographics that don't tend to vote Republican, that has been ongoing and systematic since 2013, since the gutting of the
Mhm.
Voting Rights Act, and
Mhm.
before. I mean, has been a nonstop effort, but was just given the floodgates opening for manipulation with the gutting
Mhm.
of the Voting Rights Act. And those measures that have been taken, again, in the open, out in the open.
Mhm.
This is not mysterious. This is not hooded. This is not happening
Right.
under a dramatic dark hood, surrounding a pentagram or some crazy mess. You know what I'm saying? No, this is
Mhm.
out in the open. How do we close damn polls in your neighborhood? Close off
Mhm.
polling places? How do we figure out ways to invalidate ballots? How do we figure out ways to, you know what I'm saying? All
Yep.
of that
All
conversation,
that.
the
All
Demo-
that.
the uh, uh, Democratic representatives, those conversations that they don't have when they try to
Right.
shape a rhetoric, shape an oratory that,
Mhm.
to counter manipulate, you know what I'm saying? Which
Yeah.
sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. But
So let me ask you a question.
yeah, but
Because they don't, right? The Democrats don't want
at-
to raise those things, right?
no,
But now they're in a really funky position. Do you think now we're going to get that, at least from some, like, say, the
yeah.
squad?
Oh yeah, I think the squad is some folks on the squad are more and more articulate.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
that space will open up.
Mhm.
I think alternative party space will open up. I'm feeling like, because they did get more, more folks voted Green Party.
Mhm.
And I think it will open up discourse and pressure the Democratic Party to um, will pressure the Democratic Party to assert a more explicitly left politic. The
Mhm.
pressure will be there.
Yeah.
What the response to that pressure will be, and how powerful that pressure will be, I think are questionable, because I think people need to be engaging in real uh, people power politics,
Mhm.
like boycotts, like, you
Mhm.
know, protests, like,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
uh, I believe the language is ungovernability. Meditating on,
Yeah.
contemplating, ruminating on. Okay, which the challenge is, again, a clear politic, and
Mhm.
this clarity piece. And I think that it is an
Mhm.
unfortunate advantage, and I don't think the advantage will be worth anything. You know what I'm saying? This
Mhm.
cavalier notion that, well, I'd rather know the devil I'm dealing with than to have you be duplicitous. No, be duplicitous and let me think
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
democratic
yeah. I know that. Right.
and
Yeah, I'm not sure that's
violence
what.
and yeah,
Yeah,
the days of the lynch mob and what have you all the time. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? You know what I'm saying? Are
yeah,
not preferable. You know, so
yeah.
which is
And that's
what
going to be
this
very interesting.
happen. It's gonna
When
happen.
because people are going to get in the street, right?
Yes.
People
Yes.
are going to get in the street, and it's going
Yes.
to be a wonder, right? Just,
Mhm.
I mean, I do believe he's willing.
Oh yeah.
What are the stops going to be on this president elect to not brutalize? Because he probably feels, they probably feel that they have a
Yeah.
mandate to do so. Because he said, he was explicit about
Yeah.
vengefulness, right?
Yeah.
During the
Yeah.
campaign. Um,
Yeah.
that folks need to be prepared. Now they need to be prepared to be, to face violence from the state.
Hmm.
Now we know recently, right? The Palestine solidarity protests, right, have been met with violence, and likely expected it, right, at some
Yeah.
point. Um,
Yeah.
and if we can imagine that being intensified, right, under, because I certainly can. So the test is coming, likely, right? Because
Yeah.
those things are going to be necessary. That ungovernability. Right?
Mhm. Yeah. So here's a piece, right? All right. So, yeah, newly passed terrorism financing bill. So that went through this ability to, unsurprisingly, but the ability now for the administration from the Department of Justice to label whatever organizations, specifically nonprofit civil society organizations, terrorist organizations, right? And to deny them funding on the basis of blah, 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 right? The legal statutes against material support for terrorist organizations, um, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So that creates a strident effect. I mean, in my mind, in terms, I'm looking at how the state repression space is being
Mm-hmm.
broadened,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
how quickly that can happen, because the rest is a matter of, and I think that this is a calculation, you know, um, if and as violence is applied, how much will that in itself dampen resistance? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think perhaps, well, our protest movements notwithstanding, fire hoses, dogs, uh, police attack, and
Yeah.
notwithstanding, um, even as or
Or
as
just
late as
these most recent,
yes,
cars running into marchers,
absolutely,
right? And,
absolutely, police murders of protesters in
mhm,
demonstrators and protesters in Ferguson, and
mhm.
and all of those, what I mean? So that has never been uh, neutralized, but it has
Mhm,
been less advertised, right? So a
mhm.
distinction between the super exposure of the fire hosing and dog, to the
Right.
extent that it becomes iconographic and a symbol of all things wrong with Jim Crow. You know what I'm saying? To the
Yeah.
extent that that's invisibilized, then again, the managing of perception, it creates more space for denial, it creates space for excuses, it creates space for for all kinds of things, as has been the case, right? As
Mhm.
uh, was a lot of the case, because you had, right, the a segment of the settler population that considered itself moral and considered itself having certain moral obligations, right? So this was unacceptable. So this what right? So you get a whole,
Mhm.
right? You get a whole social convention. So I'm interested in how that moral obligation is managed. The sense of moral obligation is managed in various ways, philosophically, as well as through disinformation and invisibilizing the violence of the state. You know what I'm saying? And the chilling and terrifying effect that the state violence will have as they open up, whatever
Mhm.
the name of this Gestapo is going to be, like
Mhm.
during in the Portland demonstrations, people like, and a black van came up, all the black van reporting, come to find out it was the border patrol. It was, right, and the deployment of, anyway, there's,
Yeah.
there's plenty at the ready, and that terrorism designation harkens back to Patriot Act, which
Mhm.
is still, books would love to have James elucidate and break down the, what the positioning is, and what the legal structures are in place to reinstate, to instate the police state, an active
Mhm.
militarized police state that attacks dissent, and that liberates or redeputizes the white settler population, ideally, to,
Mhm.
right, terrorize and voluntarily, spontaneously terrorize and control the populations of color
Yeah.
and other undesirable populations,
Yeah.
you know,
We know
compliant
those things are
populations.
already happening in various ways, right?
Mhm.
These acts of terror, can't even be called microaggressions.
No.
These.
Right.
I think it's fairly widespread now. The series of texts, that went out to black students, and really black folks of multiple ages around,
Yes.
reporting to the plantation crap,
Yes.
and also has been reported that Latinx folks, receiving deportation orders, right? They
Orders.
didn't
Right.
wait long, and then these various other things, right? The very, just very mean spirited
Yes.
crowing about, what women being back in their place now, and this, this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Happening in Congress around, this trans woman who's been elected, and
Mm-hmm.
which are really
Mm-hmm.
fake issues, right? On the one, I mean, it's the way they're skillful, the way they're playing the game, right? So it is proper to need to defend the human rights of this
Yes.
congressperson and all other trans folks. However small the actual percentage,
Yes.
on the other hand, it's a perfect distraction from the madness that is being proposed for the cabinet,
Right.
as well as the ongoing, there we are still living under the Biden administration,
Yeah.
as Israel continues to expand its war. I mean, and so we get caught up, and that's part of the strategy, right? They flood the zone with issues, with stories, right? And because they can't all be covered, and some are going to get buried, and it's up to the media, right, to
Yes.
report
Yes.
responsibly, whatever that means, on all of them, right? Give due attention to what is really necessary for folks. And anyway, this is the madness, that we're preparing for, and people are preparing for it, though. I mean, just as we were
Yeah.
talking, right? It's not the mandate that people think. Their
Yeah.
resistance is already forming. People are
Yeah.
already getting ready for
Yep.
what they may have to face.
Yep.
And that is very much, the hope. I know
Yep.
people are still acting, speaking, and I think, and on the one hand, it's proper to operate in that way, but also proper to be prepared for the unlikelihood.
Mhm.
People are talking like there are going to be midterm elections, and there's going to be
Yeah.
another presidential election
Yes.
in 4 years.
Yes. And
And
that's
you
not
got to
cool.
assume both, right? You got to
Yeah.
assume, you got to be, and
Yeah.
even
Ready to
recognizing
figure out.
that set of elections
Yeah.
is not
This is
revolutionary. That's
right.
just trying to hold on to the democratic
Right.
space.
Right. So
We got to
it's
hold on to the democratic space.
yes, as much as possible. And the acceptance, like you were asking earlier and talking about earlier about um political discourse being forced, forcing the Democrats into a more authentic political discourse, left political discourse, which is the authentic political discourse,
Right. Yeah.
um, um, but the winning of elections, understanding the winning or losing of elections doesn't necessarily necessitate that. So
Right.
that even if there is not the most dramatic outcome, and my thinking is if they're smart, and they are, it won't be dramatic, just a shift back to relying more on, again, this deniability and
Mhm.
invisibilizing and direct action, though the great replacement
Mhm.
ideology that was there
Mhm.
has been effective. There's not going to be so many more people who are willing to go full Nietzsche and be all, I understand that aspect of his philosophy. It's like, yes, crush the weak. What the, we're not here, that this is some silly moral conundrum that matter,
Right.
what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
we don't want to go full, So if that's not the case, then there is still the need to create deniability and invisibility.
Mhm.
The easiest way for that is to play this states' rights game again. Put everything back in the hands of the states, which
Yeah.
will create, you know what I'm saying, and
Mhm.
try to manipulate and manage that, right? As some states are doing things like um, passing or making themselves sanctuary states, whether it's for uh, immigrant rights, immigrant protections, whether it's for reproductive rights protections. Um, Certain states adopting these or taking out of their state constitution the punishment of slavery for
Right.
the crimes and whatnot. There are states that are doing that, So
Mhm.
my guess, you know what I'm saying, is that it's a combination and woefully uneducated guess, only superficially informed guess. It's
Mhm.
a combination of that there'll be a combination of those kinds of states, of which California will likely be one for however long that is the case. It will be one, and
Mhm.
then a string of states who are carrying forth this, um, this at least quasi theocratic, uh, these
Yeah.
setting up these quasi theoretic patriarchies, white
Yeah.
supremacist patriarchies.
Yeah.
And
And there are actually a lot of them.
absolutely, absolutely,
There are a lot of them.
yes, and again, even in places where, but in terms of, again, that reality of the slim margin of winning, even in
Hmm.
space, you know what I mean? Even in places where you would not necessarily expect there to be such a slim margin. And I was
Right.
surprised to see
Right,
one
right,
of
right. And places that actually pass some progressive things that you wouldn't
yeah,
expect, like raising
yeah,
the minimum wage.
yes,
I don't think we
yes,
did that in California, right?
right. No. And so, that it's the indications are, actually good. It seems like the
Mhm,
onus is,
mhm.
in terms of the fertility to make this happen, the onus is on these left forces to be able to form these coalitions, to,
Yeah,
and to get out there and educate, get out there and really stimulate
yeah.
understandings, you know what I'm saying? And that's the piece, forget Democrats, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Forget
right, exactly, exactly.
on developing
I mean,
real.
ultimately, right,
Mhm.
that's not the path,
Mhm.
yeah, ultimately, I mean, and yeah, I mean, hopefully, at the very least, they
Mhm.
will actually begin, listening to Bernie Sanders
Mhm.
and his
Mhm.
latest, criticisms, critiques.
Mhm. Mhm.
Hopefully, at least they will have the good sense to do that.
Mhm.
But yeah, they are certainly, I mean, they're very much why we're in this position.
Yes.
Because they did,
Yes.
they are not enough of a contrast and would not lean into what does make them different, right? And
Yeah.
just
Because there's nothing to lean into. There's fucking nothing to lean into. It's just a matter of, blackface, doing it in black
the
face.
the
Ultimately. I'm not talking
the
about Kamala
Roosevelt
Harris.
and
Yeah.
Johnson Democratic Party is
Mm,
long dead, right? Long, just
mhm. Right.
like
But that
barely
makes
a
me think
ghost.
about
Hmm.
that slither in the in terms of Republicans not being a monolith, and that slither of Republicans who are not happy with the Trump and alt-right status quo that's happening within their ranks. So I wonder
Yeah,
what will happen with those folks who have, described themselves as conservatives, and has nothing to do with the
and this
principle
isn't
of
conservatism, right?
conservatism.
Yeah.
Right. You know,
Yeah.
so what do they do?
And I
You
think a
know?
lot of them stayed home also, right?
Mhm.
Rather than vote for the Democrat, right? I think, however that sliver is, right? They weren't
Yeah.
convinced by the
Yeah.
campaigning with the Cheneys. They weren't
Mhm.
convinced by the Republican,
Yeah.
elites, making at least not enough to vote for, just couldn't do it. But yeah, that is part of, those folks are going to be part of either any kind of pushback, or also, going to acquiesce, and we'll see. We'll see very soon. Where
Yeah.
people are to line up,
Yeah.
how they're going to respond,
Yeah.
um, to the repression,
Yeah.
um, or to business as usual.
Yeah.
I mean, the effects are really massive, though. Just
Yeah.
um, thinking about
Yes.
all the various things, right? The climate,
Yes. Oh,
consequences.
God. God.
What does it mean for Cuba? What does it mean for Venezuela? Right? What does it mean for everyday Black folks now that Trump
Mm.
no longer needs your vote?
Yes.
Who said he doesn't really care about poor people, and loves uneducated people, but
Right.
doesn't really care about them.
Right. Right.
But so what is, all the various things, and as you said, folks, the ways in which people are preparing, preparing for resistance,
Yeah.
preparing to offer,
Yeah.
sanctuary. Um,
Yeah.
right now, trying to head off, and I think as time goes by, feelings are less involved. I hope, but some of these possible fractures among, third world coalitions, and we're meaning within this country, right? Folks who have expressed sense of betrayal around, Palestine and Palestinian supporters who wouldn't
Mhm.
vote for Harris. Folks who
Mhm.
are, black folks, right, expressing resentment or, well, disgust, but more than disgust, right? A break
Mhm.
from, right, solidarity with Latinos because of these numbers around Latino men. But then also
Mhm.
folks who are saying, look, we can't fall for that, right? This is exactly
Right.
what they're wanting, right?
Right.
This is exactly, we have to understand. Um, and again, most folks stayed home, and we're not considering how many votes were suppressed, how many folks were
Yeah.
taken off the rolls, and
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
chips
Yeah.
to our solidarity are not in our benefit. And I've seen, and I understand it. I understand it emotionally and intellectually. Particularly, I've seen some headlines, right, and statements from black women who were heavily engaged in the um, campaign for Harris, that they're done, right? Black women are done saving American democracy, being the foot soldiers for the Democratic Party, etc. Now, that's
Mhm.
great if they can take those
What's that
energies
mean? Yeah.
forward.
For does
Black
think
folks
what do you?
specifically,
Yeah.
right? Not just becoming apolitical, right?
Yeah.
So what? Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's part of
So
fighting
again,
the blow to morale, right? That um, this election
right.
engendered. And I think as time goes
Yes.
by and people are, resolved and the shock is over, um,
Mhm.
that will, those
Mm.
fractures can be repaired sooner than later. I do believe.
Yeah, and I think also another way of looking at it, an additional way of looking at it, is that what the antagonisms that
Mm-hmm.
that the voting trends surfaced
Mm-hmm.
were present. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? What
Mm-hmm.
is the actual percentage of just looking at, say, Latinx and African descendant communities? What are the actual percentages of those communities that have a conscious sense of alliance? You know what I'm saying? Based politically informed, historically
Mm-hmm.
informed kind of alliance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not, you know what I'm saying, to the extent that maybe it's
Honestly, I'm having a hard time knowing what you're saying, mainly because your voice is breaking up.
okay, let
It's
me
a
say it
technical
again.
issue.
Okay.
I
Can
mean,
you
I
hear
got
me?
the
Am I
gist
breaking
of
up?
it. I did get the gist of it, but you are breaking up.
I'll try to say it again more succinctly. That the what I'm saying is the numbers of us in that were in alliance in community based on political and historical understandings, you know, are few. You know what I'm saying? Folks who
I,
were voting
are,
Democratic
are few? Are few? You said
few, relatively few. Mhm.
relatively few.
We're relatively few folks who
Mm-hmm.
were the fact that we voted Democratic tended to vote Democratic together in similar numbers, you know what I'm saying, doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily speak to a the kind of political.
Okay, it looks like Tasha's Wi-Fi has betrayed her, dropped her off. I do assume that she will be right back, though. Yeah, I think I did get her point, despite the interference of that. The importance of not overstating the pre-existing um, levels of solidarity or understanding for the need for solidarity. Um, okay, you're back. Yes.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, exactly. Whatever you said, understanding and the need for solidarity, just those things
Yes.
together, even though I was
Yeah.
off screen, didn't hear the rest of what you
and
said.
and and
That
even the that again speaks to the being severed from those histories, right? Being severed from the stories of that
exactly,
solidarity. Yeah,
exactly. You know what I mean? So
which is
that which
older,
we
as old as the country, really. I mean, in so many ways, right? So.
absolutely. And our allegiances to the Democratic Party, you know what I'm saying, is something that has a critique upon it. It does not suggest any level of sophistication
Mhm.
at all. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
Whatever.
I do know what you're saying. I do
And
know what you're saying. How? Yeah,
so it shakes it up.
yeah.
It's not, it's not the fact that
But it's
our
beyond the Democratic Party, though, isn't it?
what?
Both the practice of solidarity, the need for solidarity, right? It's more
Absolutely.
than
Yes.
just our common voting,
That's
and
yes.
our percentages have always been higher, even in the Democratic Party. Um, and I think when you start disaggregating Latinx people, then different communities are going to demonstrate different things. Hello?
Okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm just, I hear you, right? And I
Mhm.
completely agree with you. I'm just, when you mentioned, the Democratic Party as the vehicle, it just occurred,
No,
that it's more than that, right?
yeah, no. The point I was trying to make was that the Democratic are the our similar the commitment to the Democratic Party, the similar commitments to the Democratic Party in our communities doesn't speak to any kind of internal or politically sophisticated uh, alliance. You know what I'm saying? It's not necessarily alliance.
It's
It's a
exactly. So what
simple
I'm
voting
asking you is,
Democratic.
what I'm trying to get at is what
Yeah.
does speak to that?
What I think does speak to that again is this mission of education, this mission of that the small slither of allied communities making a conscious effort to reach, well, I
Mhm,
always think about it in terms of, and not only this, but perhaps to some extent untapped friends and family, being a little bit more,
mhm,
figuring out ways to be proactive and articulate about that alliance and those histories and those, you know what I'm
mhm.
saying?
Yeah.
Um, and get that amplified and
Mhm,
begin to talk realities, right? Because we hear
mhm,
so much in our communities, the notion of immigrants taking black jobs. We hear that, we hear, I have heard it, said, well,
mhm,
yeah, I don't know well, I don't know if they should have the right to vote, talking about black immigrants, not considering that
mhm,
this is a black voting pool with common
mhm.
interests, you know what I'm saying? But coming
Yeah.
from, so yeah, I think that's where the work is,
Yeah.
to be done, that
Yes.
Um,
I will say I've always, this isn't news to you. I do think that consciousness is more widespread than you might think it is. However,
okay.
I also don't want to overstate that either, right? Because I've heard
Mhm,
those same things.
mhm,
Yeah, right. Of course, and been hearing them for decades, right? I mean, because there
mhm,
is real competition for work, right? There is real competition,
mhm,
because that
mhm,
is exactly what the system does, right? People put
mhm,
people in competition.
mhm,
But I also, see, and I think that more people, recognize commonalities, right, and common condition, etc. And all these folks are bringing their own traditions, and we
mhm,
ourselves, exhibit our own internalized anti-blackness,
mhm,
anti-indigenousness, all of
mhm,
these things, right? And
mhm,
not everyone is thinking about, the local Mexicans
mhm.
like, South Africans, right? That not every I know not everyone is seeing that, well, this is occupied Mexico. Why shouldn't there be
Right.
Mexicans here, right? But just as white
Right.
South Africans thought, well, what are Zulus doing in Cape Town, right? Just
Yeah.
South Africa's a so-called white man's country, right? That
Right.
it's yeah, I know not everybody is thinking that, because not everybody is getting that, right? And that certainly has been kept away from people. But I do think, right, there's just this fundamental level, this fundamental understanding, and especially when people are living alongside each other, right? And
Exactly.
going to
Exactly that.
school with each other, that they
Absolutely.
do see that they're in the same conditions, right? Um, Nonetheless, yeah, those things have to be. I totally agree with you, right? Those are, and that's a great place to have those conversations, right? And that should always be challenged when it comes up,
Mhm.
and reminding people, that that immigrant who may or may not have this job didn't do the hiring.
Right.
That that do not
Right.
leave. Look at the whole picture, right?
Yeah.
Who's doing the hire? Because of course that was an issue, and maybe continues to still be an issue, used as a divisive, element between black men and women, right? Black women are getting all the jobs thing, right? And yeah, many that's often quite purposeful, and even in terms of the notion that a black woman might be more easily exploitable,
And
and
repeated
a black
cross culture.
immigrant is a more
Yeah.
exploitable person, and any
Yes.
immigrant is more
Yes.
exploitable, right?
So
And
there's
those
these
are
dynamics
the conversations we have to keep having.
that we have
Yes,
to be having.
yes.
Exactly. You know?
And I'm also seeing that it's 1:32, that we've
Okay.
been at
Yes.
it for an hour and 32 minutes.
Yes, we have.
So maybe we should start closing.
I think that's a good idea. I noticed 1:30 creeping up.
Yes,
So
yes,
8:30, an hour and a half creeping up.
yes. And that is a great place to end, right? Because that's right, absolutely right, right? That is, start at home, right? Have the conversations at home, remind people, and in some ways, well, the contradictions are going to sharpen, I think, right, under Trump,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
that too is going to be its own form of political education, and so
Yes.
folks are going to be ripe for understanding. Um,
Producing. Yes.
and your insights, right? Your insights on what it means to us specifically, this attack on the 14th Amendment, right? As people are, come to understand that, um, we will, yeah. I totally concur, right? That is a great place to start intervening, um,
Mm,
in that, and re-engendering a solidarity ethic, right? I
mhm.
know folks have been talking about solidarity economy,
Yes.
mutual aid, as
Yes.
you mentioned, right? The possibilities of a genuine, multi-ethnic, multiracial,
Mhm.
democratic
Mhm.
society,
Mhm.
a society in which we can eliminate these borders,
Yes.
etc. Right? The one we are trying to build, that we are really trying to build.
Build. So
And even if it feels like we've had a major setback through this election, but the
yes,
empire is in crisis, and the election also demonstrates that.
yes, and to be able to get folk to that understanding, understand, yeah, definitely understanding where the work is and the potentialities
Yeah.
uh, that will for this conversation uh, to be opened and to be advanced, and to
Hmm.
be advanced um and we have a lot to work with. Boy, do we have a lot to work with. Boy, do we have a lot to work. Boy, do we have some rich conversations to have.
Yes, we
Particularly,
do.
when I think about all the time that has been invested in, like the program, for instance, the reference, the program that we had with Brother Kuko and Baba Femi, in
Mhm.
terms of comparative dialogue on repatriation, if you will. That's not a great term, but the reclamation of indigenous practice, living indigenous practices, indigenous systems. And I like to say, the more we seek ourselves, the more we find each other. And that is, that's a real a real point of confluence, that reclamation of worldview, that reclamation of knowledge systems, and the work that has gone into the research work, the academic work, um, um, the way that you see it popularized. You see as many Zoshilts as you do Imanis. Just my classroom references. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying?
Mhm.
He
Yeah, I
was
know
like,
what you
oh,
mean.
so I see where your parents named you for some. You know what I'm saying? in a
Mhm.
in a real way. And there is that conversation to be had. There was a poet that I heard years ago. I believe I was a teenager at the time. This brother, in one of these 19 late 80s, early 90s black spaces, and he was reciting a poem in a program. And the refrain, right, was, "You can't stop it because you didn't start it." Yes,
Mhm.
happens. You can't stop it because you didn't start it. So, um, whatever, the what weapons formed against me, the reasons why they won't prosper is because they don't really know where to look for. They know blunt instruments, they know force, they know terrorism, they know deprivation, they know these kinds of things. But in terms of really understanding how, and this is me venturing off into, you know, some other spaces, understanding how um, culture moves and um, thought moves, and how these things that knit us together. We've got uh, ground. We've got a rock to stand on. We've got a place to stand. If we stand on up and get on
Mhm.
it, you know, and get on
Yes.
it without it.
Yes. Well, I'm just always, I think it's always important to remember that we do share space, we do share communities, and on most days, most hours of any given day, we live perfectly fine together.
Hmm.
Our children go to school together, they date each other, we become family. This
Hmm.
is and such it has been, right?
Hmm.
This entire sojourn through Turtle Island, so you know that's that's where the potentialities are, right? That's where the solidarity is. It's already there in the grassroots, and humans have the capacity to learn each other's language, and especially when we're children, right? So.
Mm.
and learn each other's cultures. And we're already doing those things in ways we don't even know, right? So
Yeah.
often. Um,
Yes.
and we are more than the histories we've learned of our
Hmm.
degradation.
Absolutely.
So
Always.
always. So we'll
Mm-hmm.
close there because we're before you know it, it's going to be coming up on 2 hours, and we're not trying to do a marathon. We've done those marathons for Joko in the past 3, 4 hours, but you know,
Yeah. With about,
we're not
with about
trying to do that tonight.
on deck.
Yes, that's right, and yes, and on ground too.
Yeah.
So okay, folks, thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe to our channel if you have not done so already. Please like this video. Please share this. And I always want to emphasize the share, right? You know what? If you find this conversation worthwhile, that somebody can learn something from it, please share it. Please share the conversation. With that, next Thursday is Thanksgiving evening. I'm up for a conversation. We can focus on that.
Fun.
We can continue to talk about that. Um,
Absolutely.
and otherwise, folks, any final wishes for the people, Tasha?
Yes. I wish us all good things. What is it? Um, Blessings without number and all good things without end.
Yes,
Blessings without number and all good things without end. Courage, heart, um, resistance, and the living through and inspired by the vision of really making this world the kind of full of the kind of human life that it should be. It is within
mhm,
our grasp, as the African People's Socialist Party says, within our lifetime.
with
We're going to see
lifetime.
it within our lifetime.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Folks on Facebook, we haven't forgotten you. Do those things too. Like, share, give us some Facebook love. We are winning. We will win.